Welcome to Chromaticus. Today we're going to walk through the process of composing a piece of music in the G Mixolydian mode using modal progressions. This is just one of the many ways to compose modal music, and all the techniques that we're discussing apply to any instrumentation or style of music. It doesn't have to be orchestral music. It could be a three-piece band. Let's listen to the music example first, and then we'll break it down. As always, before we can begin to write modal progressions, we need to know two things. What is the characteristic note of the mode, and what are the options for chords? If you look at the modal progressions chart, you'll see that the characteristic note of the mode is the flat 7th degree, in this case F natural. Whether you're using triads or 7th chords, you only have one tonic chord, the G major or the G dominant 7th. The cadence chords, which lead to or precede the tonic chord, always contain the characteristic note of the mode as a chord tone. This is typically how you sound the color of a specific mode when using modal progressions, is by playing the cadence chords. However, you may have noticed if you watch the episodes on the Dorian, Phrydian, and Lydian mode that the Mixolydian mode is unique in the fact that the 7th chord version of the tonic chord contains the characteristic note of the mode. So the cadential quality and power is lost a little bit when using the 7th chord version. The cadence chords in this mode are D minor and F, or D minor 7 and F major 7, and they precede the tonic chord. The chords that are not labeled, A minor, C, and E minor, are sometimes called non-tonic chords, and sometimes they're called approach chords. I like the term approach chords because it sort of defines their purpose in that they typically approach the cadence chords, and the cadence chords then lead to the tonic chord. The diminished chord is an avoid chord, and the G7 and C major 7 can also be avoid chords, and you could also avoid the C triad for that matter, especially if you choose to use the dominant 7th chord version of the 1 chord. But you can use these chords if you exercise caution. So let me explain once again how to exercise caution with these chords. Just like with our other modes, there are a few ways you can exercise caution and still use these chords. One, you can stick to the triads because the G triad has much less of a tendency than G7 to want to resolve to C major. 2, you can play the C major chord on a weak beat or an upbeat and use an inversion. This will help it sound less like a 1 chord, or you could just avoid the chord altogether. 3, you can always use a G pedal tone underneath so that the chords sound more like triads shifting over top of a pedal tone, which sort of grounds everything in that home key. That pedal tone technique would be very helpful if you're using the G dominant 7 chord, although it would still be very useful and effective if you were using the G triad. Also note that if you play C major or C major 7 after this chord, it's just going to sound like a 5-to-1 progression in C major, and you won't be writing in the Mixolydian mode. For that reason, I chose to stick to the triad version in the example we're breaking down today, and I used the cadence chords to bring in the quality and color of that characteristic note. I also express that characteristic note quite often in the melody. Okay, let's take a look at that harmony. I got a little crazy in this episode in that I used most of the orchestra. In the previous videos, I kept things pretty simple, but in fact, this is also pretty simple even if it doesn't look like it. If you look at the chords, you have a G triad, A minor is an approach chord, and F is a modal cadence chord. And the same thing at the end, G triad, E minor is an approach chord, and D minor is a modal cadence chord. So the harmony is actually really simple. In other words, if you look through the string sections, the low brass sections, the woodwind sections, it's all just different versions of the basic G triad, the A minor triad, and so on. There really isn't anything complicated going on in the score. It might just look complex if you're not used to looking at orchestral writing. Let's take a second and just listen to the harmony. Now let's take a look at the melody. This is a strange one for me, so I originally wrote this motif. And I wrote this specifically to sound that F natural nice and boldly right in the beginning over the G triad, because without that F it would just sound like we were in G major until the cadence chord comes along a few bars later. After that, however, I got stuck and I couldn't come up with anything that I liked, so I took a step back and I forgot about melody and chords, and I just started writing these rhythms. Once I had a melodic rhythm I thought I felt was good, I went back and I added pitches to fit over the chords. And you can see how a lot of the rhythms are repeated and imitated, and that's why the melody sounds fairly cohesive. So this is what the final melody actually ended up sounding like. You'll notice that I also added trumpets in some of these key spots here, and especially towards the end when I started to get out of the range of the horn, I had to have a different instrument play that top note of the melody, and then I ended up kind of harmonizing some of these melodic notes with chords underneath to kind of give them a nice full sound. Also, I forgot to write this down, but in the very final chord, that little triplet chord there is an F natural. So there is a G dominant 7 at the very end of this piece. Let's listen to our piece one more time. There you have a Mixolydian modal composition using modal progressions. Stay tuned for the next episode where I walk you through the Aeolian mode. Alright, thanks for watching. See you next time.